let's talk about robotic affirming, not from a place of high or blind belief, but from the standpoint of what happens in the mind when you engage with repetition intentionally. At its core, robotic affirming is simply the act of repeating a chosen statement over and over, often without emotion or visualization. It's not about forcing yourself to feel something or trying to imagine a perfect outcome in vivid detail. It's about building a habit of thought so consistent that it becomes the mind's default. This method tends to divide opinion. Some call it shallow, others call it mechanical, but the reality is it works on a principle we all understand. Repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity leads to belief. The subconscious doesn't ask whether a thought is poetic or emotionally moving. It asks, how often have I heard this? Is this a familiar pattern? And if the answer is yes, it integrates the thought more deeply. That's how belief systems are formed, through repeated exposure, not one-time emotional peaks. The resistance some people feel towards robotic affirming usually stems from the idea that it seems too simple. It feels like it shouldn't work. We've been conditioned to associate personal transformation with emotional breakthroughs, long journaling sessions, and heavy introspection. Repeating I am successful 500 times a day doesn't look dramatic enough to count. But if you look at how the brain processes input, especially input that's consistent and emotionally neutral, you start to see why robotic affirming can be incredibly effective. It is not about hype, it's not about pretending, it's not even about belief at the start. It's about creating a frequency in the mind that eventually stabilizes regardless of external feedback. And that's a form of mental conditioning we already use every day, just not always intentionally.
And of course, the key word there is intentionally. People are constantly affirming things without realizing it. They're affirming limitations, doubt, failure, scarcity, just not in a way that serves them. If you wake up thinking, I'm behind, or nothing ever works out, and those thoughts repeat throughout the day, you're already engaging in robotic affirming. You're just reinforcing the outcomes that you don't want. When you flip that and begin deliberately choosing a different statement, the brain doesn't instantly resist. It notices the change. It tracks the frequency. And over time, it reorients toward the repeated input. That's what makes this method so clean. It doesn't depend on mood, motivation, or emotional energy. It simply depends on consistency. Now, the subconscious responds best to clear, concise language. Long affirmations filled with qualifiers tend to lose their punch. Simpler statements like, I am chosen, money comes easily, or I'm healthy and thriving stick. And when repeated often enough, they take root. But here's the part people misunderstand. You don't have to believe them at first. You just have to say them. Belief is a byproduct of repetition, not a prerequisite. Some people confuse robotic affirming with blind optimism or magical thinking. That's not the case. This is about mental conditioning, which is more aligned with cognitive restructuring than esoteric. You're interrupting an old thought pattern and replacing it with a new one, not through analysis, but through saturation. You're removing the resistance that often creeps in when you try to feel your way into belief, and instead opting for neutral, steady reinforcement.
Yeah, that's actually a great distinction. Saturation versus emotional persuasion. A lot of traditional manifestation approaches emphasize getting into the right emotional state. But emotion can fluctuate wildly. Some days you feel aligned, some days you don't. Robotic affirming removes that variable. It creates change through exposure, not effort. This method doesn't require you to understand neuroscience in depth, but if you're interested, it's worth noting that repetition literally builds new neural pathways. Every time you think a thought, you fire neurons. When you repeat that thought consistently, the pathway strengthens. Eventually, the brain favors that route because it's well worn. That's not spiritual rhetoric, that's how neural pathways work. It's also why the results with robotic affirming tend to be faster for people who commit to it fully. Not because they did anything mystical, but because they're introducing the new belief so frequently that the brain has no option but to adapt. It becomes the new normal, and once that happens, external reality tends to shift to match the internal signal. Some people may never resonate with this approach, and that's absolutely fine. But dismissing it because it seems overly simplistic misses the point. Simplicity isn't the enemy of effectiveness. In many cases, it's the foundation of it.
There's also something to be said about the discipline involved. Robotic affirming is straightforward, but that doesn't mean it's easy for everyone. It requires mental focus, not emotional intensity, but a willingness to stay with the repetition long enough for it to take hold. And that's where a lot of people waver. They affirm for 20 minutes, and then they spend the next 2 hours worrying or contradicting what they just affirmed. That back and forth cancels out the impact. It's like treading water. Plenty of motion, but no progress. Robotic affirming works best when it becomes the dominant mental rhythm, not a momentary insert. Consistency doesn't mean perfection. Doubts will come up. Old thoughts will resurface, but that's normal. The difference is you don't feed them, you don't argue with them, you redirect. Every time. That's how new internal stories are built, one repetition at a time. And when done consistently, this method offers something that other approaches don't always deliver: mental clarity. Over time, the inner noise quiets down. The new thought becomes automatic, and reality begins to respond in ways that align with it.
In the end, robotic affirming isn't about forcing belief. It's about gently installing a new one through repetition. No drama, no high stakes emotional gymnastics. Just the decision to say a new thought often enough that it becomes default. Whether someone chooses to use it or not is entirely up to them. But for those looking for a clean, effective way to shift mindset and results without overcomplicating the process, robotic affirming offers a surprisingly powerful option.
True. If you found this helpful, take a moment to subscribe. Share this conversation with a friend that needs it. Hit the bell so you never miss our most current talks. And leave a comment letting us know your experience with affirmations. Have you tried robotic affirmations or something else different entirely? This channel is about practical tools that create change, and your input helps guide future topics. Thanks for watching, and remember, your mind is always listening. The only question is, what are you choosing to repeat? Until next time, think differently, dream boldly, and create consciously.